Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from or when you're watching. It's your girl, Marcy L. Thomas, founder of Brown Girl Collective and the BGC Book Club, coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. And if anyone is joining us for the first time, please feel free to drop us a line and let us know where you're joining from, or if it's your first time, or if you're here every week, whatever the case may be, because we love to get the pulse of who is in the room to share these outstanding conversations. So the BGC Book Club has been around since April of 2020, when I decided to take my love of reading and turn it into a platform where I could share it with those of you who love reading just as much as I do, but do things a little bit differently by actually having conversations with those who create the works of art that we love to read so much. And tonight is no exception. I am really excited to have Rachel Eliza Griffiths with us. It's hard to say that real fast. She is a poet, visual artist, and novelist. She is a recipient of the Hurston Wright Foundation Legacy Award and the Patterson Poetry Prize, and was a finalist for an NAACP Image Award. She is also a recipient of fellowships from many organizations, including Kavikanam Foundation, Kimbilio, the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center, the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, and Yaddo. Her work has been published in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Tin House, and many other publications. And we are here this evening to discuss her glorious new novel, Promise. So without any further delay, welcome, Rachel Eliza, welcome. Oh, you're muted. You are muted.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be here in conversation with you, Marcy, and the Brown Girl Collective. This space is so special. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. When I found out about your book and, read a little bit about what it was about your story, I just knew that I had to grab a hold of it. And I'm just so honored that you actually could take the time out of your schedule to join us. So congratulations. I know I told you that behind the scenes, but I want to say that publicly. Congratulations on this novel, which is a beautifully written, glorious story.
Thank you so much. Yes. This book is 7 years in the making, and it's just been a journey to see it now kind of go out into the world beyond me, and to start to feel people being moved and reading. It's the best feeling in those of us who love books, and I know I'm in a group where that is the thing, is that the special intimacy and relationship you can have between yourself and readers is essential.
Absolutely. So now you just said it was a 7-year journey. So what was it that took 7 years to get this work of art out into the world?
I'm going to say life. Life is kind of what happened. I began working on this book seriously. I had drafts of this book and the story and the characters that have been floating around years before, really sitting down at my desk and starting to say, I'm going to concentrate and commit to this. But I began in 2014 when my mom passed. Okay. And when my mom passed, it was that kind of clarifying moment in the middle of grief. I had this need to create and to have something I could hold on to. And I wanted to think about Black girls and Black womanhood and, my relationship with my mother and being a daughter, particularly in the Black tradition, what that means. And then kind of just women in my life who mothered me, Black women writers, and just living poets and friends and so many figures that I feel in this space, Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Lucille Clifton and, Audre Lorde, June Jordan, Sonia Sanchez, all of these women that I had looked to raise me in certain ways as a Black woman writer. So when my mom passed away, I really felt like this is the time you need to sit down and get really quiet spiritually, and all of the energy and feelings that you feel, this love letter to Black women and Black girls can now kind of go into this story. So while I was working on, the novel, I also published a book of poetry called Seeing the Body in 2020, and that kind of kept me busy. And then we had a global pandemic,
Right.
really, really was working a lot of the time. My pandemic journey was kind of sitting alone and working, listening to these characters, listening to Cinthy and Ezra.
And then that's something, because you mentioned, the wonderful women who kind of mothered you as a writer. And it's just to think about that, we have our natural mothers, and then through the reading of poetry or prose or literature, we can be mothered or learn and grow and experience in so many different ways. And I find that quite powerful because, as I said to you offline, just the way that this book is written, it's so beautifully written. So I could tell you're a poet just by your use of language and how you explain things, and how you really dive into the story, and you really feel like you're there as you're reading. Actually, we have Phyllis who has a comment. She said that she's saying hello. She received an ARC, loved it, and provided a 5-star review on Goodreads, Amazon, and recommended to my local book club and others. See, that's what we're supposed to do, Phyllis. So
yes, thank you so much, Phyllis. I'm really grateful for that. Yes, I need all of that. Please show me love and show this book love. That's how it lives and goes on, of people saying, I read this book and I want you to read it. And, that's how I am with my friends and my girlfriends and things, and just, and cheering on my friends. There's so many beautiful books that are being written in the Black imagination that it's just, I love to see it,
Right. And she agrees that your poetic talent shines in this novel. Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that being said, now being a poet and a novelist, which one came first? Or did they kind of come at the same time?
For me, these things existed at the same time. Since I was a small girl, I always was writing poetry. I was always writing fiction. Like when I would say, as early as maybe 6 or 7 years old, I just felt like I'm an artist, and I knew that about myself. And so over the course of many years, it was about kind of my emotions and wanting to share myself creatively. And so sometimes that form was a poem, and sometimes that was trying to write a short story or a long story. And in my basement and closets, I have boxes full of, novels that never need to see the light of day, but like stories, characters. I was a huge reader from the moment I could read, and my family really encouraged reading in my life. But I was always reading and kind of thinking, like, how did they do that? And that feeling, that you said of like being in the story, caught up in the story, that really mattered to me. So and still does, that feeling of just getting carried away in the world of a book is one of the best feelings I think that we get as human beings, particularly when they're books by authors who look like us and are for us. But I always wrote both of them at the same time. And then I would say, as I begin to develop and think, how am I going to make a career and like live, because my parents were like, we love the books, we love the writing. How are you going to feed yourself? How you're going to, how are you going to be in the world? Can this be a hobby? What can else this be? And I just was so determined that this is what I want to do with my life. So what happened with me and my story, Marcy, is that when I went to graduate school at Sarah Lawrence, and even just before that, when I did graduate work before at the University of Delaware, I began to take, classes and different things. I was still very shy about my poetry. Actually, I would never show poetry to anyone. I was very shy and very sensitive, and poetry was so special to me that it felt hard to let anyone read it. And so I was studying more fiction. And when I went to Sarah Lawrence for grad school, I actually studied fiction, and I began to take poetry courses. I got involved with the Cave Canem Collective, which completely changed my sense of Black poets and community. And so what happened is that poetry began to get published first, kind of in the outside world. And all of that time, I was still reading, writing short stories and things. So I would say I'm actually someone, it almost feels like, I don't even know how to describe it, like speaking two languages at the same time or something. So I've always written both. And I'm just, it took me a while to really feel for fiction or prose that I was ready and had the maturity and the sophistication and kind of knew the characters in the world. And I just was a late bloomer. And I think that's really nice, actually.
Actually, it is because it gives you more life experience, more
Yes.
wisdom, just so many different things, and that more time to read and study and hone your craft. So I think that's
Mhm.
wonderful. So for
Mhm.
those, unlike Phyllis and myself, who may not have had opportunity to read the book yet, just give us a little bit of what Promise is about. What is the story about?
Sure. So, Promise is the story of two young Black girls who are 13 and 15 years old, named Cinthy and Ezra, who live in a very small, isolated fishing village in northern Maine in 1957. And what happens is that the girls are coming of age, their bodies are developing, they're looking around at the home and life that their parents are trying to provide from them, and they start to have a lot of questions, and their questions are reflected in a kind of growing tension and hostility by this mainly kind of white community where they have been raised and where they have kind of been sheltered. And so as the girls are coming into age, they have a friendship with a young girl, Ruby, who is white. And the three girls are kind of at this brink of trying to understand a new kind of education that is being hurled at them from all different directions. Their parents are saying, like, things are dangerous for you. You need to be careful. We want to protect you. You have to have an education. At the same time, they're going into the village and people are looking at them almost in a criminal way, or that they're threatening when they're still actually girls. And then they are arriving in this hard, tender moment with Ruby, where they're starting to say, she's a white girl and we're Black girls. And that means something in 1957, or this means something where we are. And our parents in the world are telling us that we are expected to be and have a certain kind of life that she's not going to have, but that we're going to have. And so then the novel then goes and follows them in a very focused way on kind of their almost first few months of school and the education they're getting in the classroom, which is falling apart, and the kind of self-knowing and self-knowledge and self-learning that they're getting around them, which is also falling apart. They live in a family with their parents, a very loving, protective family, and the family is forced to start to confront some very painful intergenerational trauma that has happened, that has been kept away from them. And so you follow the girls who are very bold, they're very defiant, they have a really tight bond and connection with each other as they start to push back on the world saying, you're Black girls, you're invisible, you don't matter. And if you do matter, it's to be of service to everybody else but yourselves. And so they're following their dreams. A lot of hard and harrowing things happen in the novel. And at the same time, the girls, they bear down and they are held in love. And toward the novel's end, as a lot of things have happened, there is still this sense of hope and love and, literally this sense of survival. And I just want to say, there's a moment where Ezra, the eldest sister, and her younger sister, Cinthy, which this is where the title comes from, she says, don't love your pain, and that the world promises us harm, and there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do about that, but the promise is to have the nerve to love your life. And so these two girls are kind of going forward with that calling that no matter what happens, there is something in the fact that they have the lives that they do and the histories and memories and love that they have.
Yes, and it is such a powerful book. And you're right. There are times when things are happening and I'm like talking to the book like, what? No, she didn't. No, he didn't. Gasping, all those sorts of things as I'm reading, because it is something just to watch these young ladies and the things that they experienced in 1957, but then also in my mind, look at current day and in some of the ways that we are dealing with some of the same things.
Yes. I would say, to just pick up on what you're saying, which I completely agree with. Promise is labeled as a work of historical fiction, but I really feel that it's a contemporary work of fiction. There's so many, and it's sad. It's sad and it's disappointing and it's angering that the psychic and historical landscape of America in 1957 is pretty much on display right now in America, if not worse. And so, the novel is happening as the pendulum of the civil rights movement is starting to really ascend and move. And you think and know that we're standing on the shoulders of so many activists and Black people and history and everything that was done. And now, we look around and we're seeing so many things happening legally, culturally, everywhere, that you feel like things are just rolling back and reverting to a really hard and volatile time. And, I wish that the book was a book that you could read and say, oh, that happened then. But this thing, that William Faulkner says is that the past is not even past, it's present. That certainly was the case. And it felt hard, really difficult, working on the book in certain moments. Like you said, you were talking to the book, I would be sobbing some days, I would be crying. I said, these characters are really trying to take me through it. And then a part of me was like, nothing I write in this book even maybe comes close to the actual history and legacy and stories, so many that we're still just finding out about, of people having courage and strength and refusing to be silenced about freedom and the right for Black people to have full, whole lives, to have humanity. So, it feels like, there's issues of police brutality in the book, issues about body politics and education. Education right now, especially with everything that's happening with affirmative action and the state of schools in America right now, everywhere, and what learning means. And the old kind of way is, if you get your college degree, if you go to school, you have security. And that is a promise that has failed this country widespread. It's just not true now, and there's something that has to be reckoned with that. And the book is trying to look at that moment when it was happening. And then, of course, we reading the book, there's just different moments we know what's coming. And I think that's also a powerful thing with the reader, that we know where these girls who don't know anything, they don't know what's happening. They're seeing Little Rock 9 happen, they're reading about that. But we as readers, we're here in 2023 and looking at that world,
And we know what the outcome is, and we're still in the fight. I'm going to paraphrase a quote by Coretta Scott King, something to the effect that freedom has to be won and fought for in every generation. We never completely have it. It's something that we have to continue to fight for. I'm paraphrasing, everybody. Y'all go look it up. It's a quote by Coretta Scott King talking about the fact that we have to continue the fight, basically. We cannot lay down our weapons. It's a continual fight. But one thing I found interesting is the fact that you placed the story in Maine. And even though I know that there are Black people that live in Maine, probably not a whole lot. not so much then and now, and definitely not then. What was it that made you decide to place your story in Maine? Do you have a connection to that state, or was that just how the story came to you as you were, working through it?
I think when I was younger, I would spend some time kind of up in that area in New England, very far north. And I was very struck when I was younger of just the incredible beauty of the landscape, but also a tension I would feel as far as kind of like, how would someone like me have community, have family, school? Like, what would it be like for, a Black girl to grow up in this kind of environment? It's very kind of sparse and kind of gorgeous, almost dramatic, cinematic wildness and solitude. And at the same time, for me as an artist, I felt that if I moved my story north, I would have more oxygen and freedom to
Mhm.
focus on the characters and what's going on with them. I feel as though it would almost have been, for me, too easy to situate my story in Mississippi or Georgia or Alabama, Louisiana, or something. I also feel that there are so many extraordinary Southern writers, Black Southern writers, doing that work and writing stories and things that I felt I want to read those stories. Um, I felt as though I was born in Washington, D.C., and then raised in Wilmington, Delaware. So I'm more mid Atlantic. And so
Mhm.
I like this gray space that I'm in where I can look toward the north, I can look toward the south, have family in both directions. And so um, I like the idea that in Maine, I could isolate the families and the dramatic tension and not almost get caught up in um, some of the too easy, reckless ways that people will talk about the South
Right.
when they're thinking about the South and lynching or civil rights, and then their mind will kind of go into a default place and not really, and it feels too familiar. So I wanted to remove that familiar energy from this story. And I also like the idea of the actual climate and the coldness
Mm.
and the iciness to connect that with racism and race, the blizzards, the snowstorm, the literal whiteout that happens in the book, um, gave me a lot to think about and work with the complexity that's happening psychologically with all of the characters and what's happening to them.
Yes, yes. And see, everybody, remember I said the poetic? Just the way that she said that, the ability to think about that and to put those parallels together, that just, excuse me, speaks to the power of the way that the story is written.
Mhm,
And, it's a couple of things, even though my father grew up in Southern Ohio,
mhm,
but like that corner where it's like Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, all kind of meet. Some people, would say that consider it Appalachia in that
mhm,
area. And as I was reading the story, some of the things stood out to me about him being in a community where there really weren't a whole lot of Black people,
mhm,
and how we see these girls go through this thing is, when they're little and they're young, they just kind of play and they just kind of live and, do their thing. But as they get older, people start to
mhm,
look at them differently. And I can recall my father telling similar stories that, once he got to the point that people thought that he might have been looking at their daughters, things kind of shifted.
oh, for sure. Mhm,
And
mhm,
in the story, we see that as these young women start to blossom and look like women, versus looking like little girls, that
mhm,
there is a certain, not that the family wasn't trying to protect them at all times, but it
mhm.
becomes even more critical at that point.
Mhm, mhm, absolutely. I mean, I think for these particular girls, but all of us can relate when we start to get to that age where we have so many questions, and the grown-ups are telling us things. We can see things in front of us. We're pushing back at the traditions, and at the same time, the traditions are raising us. And then there's the moment, I want to bring up for a minute into this conversation, because I feel her energy, Zora Neale Hurston, who's one of my favorite writers,
Mhm.
and that moment, and their eyes were watching God, where you know um Janie is, under the pear blossom tree. I think she's just kissed a boy. She's feeling herself. The pear blossoms, the bees are kissing the flowers. It's summertime. She's just in love with how beautiful she is and how natural she feels and natural the world is. And her grandmother, who's in the house working, sees her out there and is like, "You need to come in." And
Mhm.
pull, kind of gives her this life lesson of, like, Black women are the mules of the world, and
Right.
you need to get on the program of the mule and the work. And I'm sorry to kind of, bring you down, but I want to protect you. and Janie is angry with her. And at the same time, she loves her grandmother, and her grandmother is doing that to protect her. But at the same time, that tension, right? That polarizing feeling of, black women being the mule and not the flower, not having the softness, the vulnerability, the delicacy, that goes back, obviously, this sense of mule and labor goes back to enslaved times, but that feeling of having to choose or having no choice about it at all, just really is something, as I was growing up, in my own family, with my mother feeling that tension of her wanting to protect me, trying to sometimes want me to be soft and vulnerable and have a childhood. And then at the same time, she would have to be telling me all these kinds of really adult things to say, you can't run around like your girlfriends and
Right.
be out, and I can't lose you. I have to protect you. And so, even though those things would sometimes really be confusing and mixed signals, I think that dissonance is something that I wanted to explore in the book of, and one of the things I really love right now that's happening, I was talking to another Black writer who I really respect, and she was bringing up this thing to me about, the soft girl movement of,
Yes.
Black girls just saying, I want to sit with flowers, I want to take naps, I want to have candles and flowers, and just, I want to have peace, I want to have hot baths, I want to have joy, and and that I'm going to resist, and I don't have to suffer to say, I earn things, or I matter, or that I'm the strong Black woman. Like, there's other things I have a right to be. And I feel like that's very powerful to think about. And I feel, there were women, Alice Walker and June Jordan and Audre Lorde, also talking about, radical Black joy, Black womanhood, and claiming that. But the feeling of constantly work, 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 work. There's
Right.
always work, the fight. And Fannie Lou Hamer, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yes.
And we all can see, Marcy, I know it, the consequences, the literal fallout from heart attack, diabetes, depression, mental health, from that pressure to work and fight at every front, even sometimes within your home, is real,
It is real. It's definitely real. And you are touching on, relationships with mothers and daughters. And in this book, we have, the Kindred sisters, as Ezra and Cinthy. We have their mother who's having one experience of motherhood, but then they have this auntie, Mrs. Junkett. For some reason, right now, I'm having a brain a brain freeze on her name, but Mrs. Junkett, who also was a part of their lives and showed a different type of motherhood. So how important was it for you in this story to have them kind of like have two moms, the mother who birthed them, but then there's a mother or auntie who's a part of the community who's also helping to raise them and formulate ideas that would determine what type of women they would become?
Yeah, so this is Miss Irene, is her name, Miss Irene, Miss Junkett. And she is, I think one of the real powerful things that happens many times in Black families is the extended family, or the person who is the auntie. You may have play aunties, real aunties, whatever, but that feeling that it's a neighborhood or a community that is raising a child. And so in this environment, there are only two Black families. And so Miss Irene is this real force of nature. And I loved her boldness and her defiance, and that she helps give that to Cinthy and Ezra, where their mother has a strange relationship with her own mother. It's very strained. They're not speaking at the novel's beginning. There's an issue that you find out in the novel of, why Cinthy and Ezra's mother, has a dysfunctional relationship with her mother. And so that affects, of course, how she's raising her daughters. But then she also is having, and it's not giving anything away, things are happening with her body. And so she's not necessarily able to be present in a certain kind of way with her daughters. And Miss Irene was a joy to have her in the story. She's very independent. She is almost militant. She's a creator. She has machetes on the wall. Like, she is not the one to play with.
Right.
And I just, I come from a very fearless line of women in my own family who are very independent. They do not suffer fools in the arena. And so I needed to have that presence. She's cooking these rich meals. She's nurturing. She has 4 children. She's from the South and is very proud of that she can go back to the town where she's born every summer with her family, and everyone's on the porch. It's a real embrace of Black tradition in really beautiful ways. And so there's almost a co-parenting that is happening, that the women step up and hold space for each other because there's no one else.
Right.
And so, I like Miss Irene, she's making the clothes for her family. She's making stews. She'll show up at the school, and you don't want her to show up taking her earrings off.
Right.
Like, she will get in someone's face. She's not, she's the one to have the gun in her purse, in her skirts. Like, you can mess around and find out if you want to. But
right.
I felt that I wanted that multi-dimensionality, especially because there is this strangeness that Cinthy and Ezra's own parents are very suspicious because of trauma of, they're not going to be the family at church on Sunday. Maybe they'll be there, but they're not. They're a little bit skeptical and nervous about, church and certain things in the community. They're nervous where they are about the civil rights movement. If you think of like them all the way in this part of the country,
right.
They're reading the paper, they're listening to the radio, what's going on down there? They don't know what's happening, right? We do. So they're kind of like, what's going on? What's happening? Whereas the Junketts and Miss Irene, they're like, that's where it's at, and we need to get on the train. So, I like that the relationship in particular that Miss Irene has with the older sister. She really almost is more her blood mother than her actual blood mother, as far as making her say, like, this is the fight. This is what, this is what's possible. You have choices. And so I really, I'm really grateful that I could hear Miss Irene's voice so clearly, and her humor sometimes, and her energy to call a thing what it is, I think added a lot of oxygen and space and fearlessness to the story.
Right. Thank you so much. And she's a joy to read. So as you all are reading the story, because I know that you will, you're really going to enjoy learning about Miss Irene as well, because she's kind of like Medea.
Yeah.
I mean, not really like Medea, but I mean, just from the standpoint, and she's not taking any mess. And she's like, they said what? They did what?
Right. She has a little Wakanda energy, I'll say, she's got a little, she might take out a spear and jump over you and tell, she's herself into a lot.
She is going to bring it. She's going to bring it. But, also the fathers play a prominent role in this book as well, which I can really appreciate that. But the thing that's interesting is that you have one father who is kind of like the blue collar worker, and then you have the other father who is an educator. But at the end of the day, in this space, we come to find out it doesn't matter what you do. People are going to look at you the same way, regardless of what you do.
Absolutely. And I wanted to have these girls have very beautiful, powerful, strong relationships with their fathers. That was first and foremost for me in this environment. And what you said is right on, is that the duality of kind of the class issues, which are, also bear down in the book, that even though Cinthy and Ezra's father is more intellectual or educated, like you said, at the end of the day, and Miss Irene's husband, Mr. Caesar, he's, custodian, janitor, he's taking care of the school where they are, cleaning up everyone's mess. At the same time, they need each other. And it doesn't matter that one is above the other. To everybody else in the village, they're dangerous Black men, or threatening, or intimidating, and that plays out in a number of ways. But what is totally, I think, important and visible is how much these fathers are trying to be there in 1957 for their daughters, and how hard the world makes that for them. Even their past make that hard. And so I wanted them to have loving relationships with their wives. And that it's even harder for them in the world up there, even though they escaped from the South, or thought they were leaving the South, because
Right.
things, this feeling like, that we've seen, like, oh, if you're in the North, life is better. It's not, you're not going to be hanging from a tree, but there's a lot of other issues.
Right.
And I think that's another thing of bringing it to the North. Of the North wasn't, you got to the North and then you could walk down the street and people would be fine with you. It's a different kind of presence of racial hostility and different things happening, that, just want to bring that into the room.
And that is so true. I grew up, and I mentioned my father was in Southern Ohio. I actually grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And even though at the time that I was growing up, there were certain things that I didn't experience just based upon my age. But, I do understand that in cities like Cleveland, there were still some neighborhoods that as Black people, you didn't necessarily move into, or certain parts of town. Or, I think of Chicago. We know a lot of stuff happened in Chicago, and still to this day, there are a lot of areas where things are really segregated. So it's something that still continues, where you are seeing, just because it's up north doesn't mean that it's necessarily better. A lot of times people will say, at least down south, you kind of know who your enemies are.
Absolutely.
Or, a lot of times you really don't know. You really don't know. And racism shows up in a lot of different ways. One of the other parts of the story that I thought was really powerful is the relationship that Ezra and Cinthy had with Ruby. And seeing that friendship that they, had, or more so Ezra and Ruby, how they had this friendship. And of course, she would be considered, I guess, poor white trash.
Yep.
But, she had this relationship with them, or this friendship with them. How important was it for you to include that element within the story as well, just to show how oftentimes that may have happened in some circumstances, but how things can shift as time goes by?
Well, I think, they're young girls, and when they were younger, this kind of feeling that they were kind of wild. They're running around in the woods, they're out on the bluffs, they're down on the wharfs and the piers, like exploring and being adventurers and being girls. And there's a class thing that's happening. I mean, the village itself is blue, I would say it was working class, it's blue collar, it's people earning a living by trade. They're fishermen, having crafts, they're carpenters, or different kinds of things. And so they're already, you kind of have, Cynthy's father, who's this kind of intellectual, he's not even kind of, maybe they're not used to having Black people around, but then he's even more unusual, that he doesn't really reflect maybe even the Black people they would expect to have around. So when you have Ruby, though, when I think of the girls, they're getting to a point where, Ruby and Ezra, have just had their first, they've just begun their menstrual cycle. They've just gotten their periods. The spring before school is about to start. It's their last year. And, they're now saying, oh, we're women, or everyone is treating us like we're women now, and people are looking at us like we're women. But Ruby is under this illusion, and she's very naive in a certain way, because while Cinthy and Ezra have a family structure and have parents, Ruby doesn't really have that. Ruby is parenting herself. She is her own mother and her own father. She lives out almost in the wild, almost in a shack. She has a very almost naive and innocent view of freedom and Black people having their freedom, and she's going to have her freedom. And she aspires to be a pilot, to literally like fly in the sky. She thinks, well, I want to be a pilot, so why can't I be a pilot? I'm going to do that. And as she is starting to look around where decisions are, school's about to finish. It's 1957. What is possible for you to do and be
Right.
as any kind of girl, right? You're going to be married. You're going to college. If if you're a Black girl, can you even go to college or go somewhere? You need to get married. You have to have a family. Well, she doesn't have access to, her mother is pretty absent and not involved in parenting her in any real way because her mother has a lot of issues. And then the father, um, is very, very violent, is very mentally unsettled. He has a lot of intergenerational trauma of how he was raised to be a white man, and he pretty much failed to be the white man he was expected to be. And so, in some way, Ruby's lineage of what she's supposed to have at this point of being a little white girl has not been taught to her.
Right.
And so she's starting to learn, oh, I am a 15-year-old white girl. I'm looking in these beauty magazines from 1957, and I'm looking at Marilyn Monroe and all these starlets, and how to have a home and to have the husband and have my kids, and live in a certain neighborhood and have the white picket fence. Well, I'm living in a shack, barely able to feed myself. Well, what does that mean, right? She literally sometimes goes over to Cinthy and Ezra's house and is eating out of their trash because she's starving, right? So the fact that she has to kind of come into this education, which she does, she almost everything that happens to her is flipped, what could have happened to Ezra and Cinthy seems to happen to Ruby. And so you watch what happens to her as she starts to try to figure out how to put on almost the skin of being a white girl and growing into a white woman, like how she doesn't know how to do that. And so when she's younger, and because she's, poor, she's like, oh, well, you can hang out with those Black girls because you're poor white trash. But at a certain point, her still being poor white trash is better than being a Black girl. And so all of that psychological thing where she starts to think about this and realize, oh, this lineage is waiting for me. I just need to find someone to teach me how to do it and put it on. And she does, right? And so then she changes in almost a sad way. And I think rather than have necessarily in the story all of the binary of white versus Black, it's very gray. They all have complex things that they're happening to them. And one of the fallouts, one of the consequences, of course, is the almost impossibility of them being able to grow together and have any kind of friendship or alliance or anything. It's just the world is not going to allow that. So I really wanted to think about that and explore that. And I think in many instances, even now, it's very hard or challenging to look, particularly, as we're, in this world of Karens and Beckys and all kinds of things, and say, look at what, I'm thinking of Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye and whiteness and what happens with the dolls and all of these things that, this isn't new. And what happens if this white girl, for this white girl, it is new. It's revelatory to her.
Right. And, as I was reading, it made me think of my own childhood, because I grew up, I mentioned Cleveland, Ohio. The earliest years of my life, I was in all Black environments. And then I later on moved into an environment where it was more of a mixture. But I did notice that once we got, out of elementary school and started going into junior high and high school, I noticed the division. And I don't know, I can't even say that it was necessarily deliberate, but it definitely happened where, the fringe group started to change. And everybody wasn't necessarily, going over to the little white girl's house to hang out anymore. She wasn't coming to my house anymore to hang out, even though we had grown up together. So it is something that oftentimes does happen, just because I think, I don't know if it happens so much now, but at least when I was growing up, is that you start to have different interests. And, it does sometimes become that thing of who's dating who, or who wants to be interested in who. And maybe there were parents or people in their ears saying, oh, you shouldn't hang with this person, or, things like that. So it definitely happens. And then even as an adult, going into work situations or whatever, a lot of times it is the people that you gravitate towards. And, and I can be honest, in some instances, even when I may have had, white coworker friends, that in the back of my mind, there's always a little like, okay, when is something going to happen that they're going to say something that, goes left?
Right.
It's real.
Oh, it's totally real. Or even, they say something, or, when they don't even know, and you're left to kind of expected to do the labor, or to call it out, or to say nothing, and that does something to you too. I know, for me growing up, and I think I'm very interested in the site of classrooms and school, and like how you learn to have the knowledge you have, and how that can fight your intuition and your spiritual knowing of who you are. But I went to, growing up, all Catholic school. And so for me, because of the Catholic schools I was in, to have a certain kind of education, it also meant that I was removed from Black schools and Black public schools and the kind of Black community, even though my parents, I think, or my mother really would try to have it elsewhere, at home, in the community, in my neighborhood, in church things or whatever. But I would be in school and maybe there are 2 or 3 Black students in these accelerated classes and things. And so even, how painful it is, when you're reading the Black book, if you read that at all, or you get to that moment where it's time to do slavery, and you just feel the collective resistance, and everyone is looking at you, and you're expected to do what, and you're a child, and you're also trying to process this knowledge that you're getting about the American history in the presence of people who, they don't want to feel guilty. And I mean, we can, again, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, this is happening right now with these things that are happening everywhere of, white children don't want to feel guilty and shamed and embarrassed. So we're just going to change the history or remove it or not teach it because of discomfort. And discomfort is necessary, pretty much whoever you are, to have these conversations. Where you fall on the spectrum of discomfort or whatever have you is one thing, but the conversations now where people really are enacting these kinds of things of, well, we're just not going to talk about that, and we're going to take action so that no one can talk about it, no one can, ban it, exile it, erase it, the erasure of it. I mean, it's staggering to me, Marcy.
I agree.
It's staggering. And where would we be if we had to erase white history? I mean, where will we be sitting? I mean, where would they be sitting? Right. So, the space of the classroom, and, when I'm thinking of growing up, and, it happens in the novel where this edict of, you have to be twice as good. You have to be, that's exhausting for a child. You have to be twice as good at being a child, and if you're a Black girl, you have to be twice as good as being you, and what matters to you, which means suppressing pretty much everything about yourself because there's so much pressure on you. And it's coming from home as a way to protect you, but then you're getting there and you're really realizing you could be the person who raises your hand as I was and knew all the answers, and still no one's looking at you. No one, you're not, they're going to pick Jane. They're picking Katie. They're not picking you, even though you studied and did everything. And so it's just, all of this stuff that we're continuing to grapple with. And then more and more, younger generations of Black women and Black girls and Black people saying, like, I can choose to control how much I'm going to engage with this so that I can have peace and have rest and not kill myself trying to do this labor.
Right.
So, it's so complex and it's so emotional. And I think of being in the classroom and being taught to go against my intuition or my instincts or my guts as a natural thing of just, you can't trust yourself, your own voice, when someone's saying, well, this is the fact or the history, and you're thinking, what? Or no, this can't be, or my body, my family, the people who love me say different. So then I'm disobedient because I'm not going to memorize this thing that erases me and takes me out of being alive or having humanity.
Yeah.
It's really,
That is something. And, I'm just thinking in the book how you mentioned it does happen in the book where, the smartest student in the class is Cinthy.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
she's, ignored. They don't want to hear what she has to say.
mhm.
When some different things happen that you have to read the book to find out that, it's
Yeah.
like now she has to show up, but she cannot use her voice. She's
Mhm,
ignored. And,
mhm,
that's something that is obviously real as well.
mhm,
So there are just so many things in the book. We couldn't get into all of it in the time that we have, because believe it or not, our time is almost up.
mhm. This has
But
been amazing. This has been
yes,
so nice.
thank you. And and just the point, we want people to read because it is a powerful book. There are going to be some things that are tough to read or to think about or to deal with, but it's just real.
Mhm,
And, as I've said many a time, and Phyllis earlier on agreed with me that it's just so beautifully written that it takes things that might be a little bit tough, but is written in such a way that you want to see it through to the end. You want to see, that hope. You want to see, how this family is going to move forward and thrive and, deal with some love, some loss, and all of those things, but
mhm.
which we all do, but how we can also come out on top at the end.
Yes.
So now the book has been out for a couple of weeks now, about
Yep. About 2.5, almost 3 weeks.
almost 3 weeks. So what types of things do you have on the horizon where people can maybe see you in this type of format or come see you live, or what's up next in terms of promoting the book and the story?
Well, I think because it's kind of the middle of the summer, people are having their summer rest, which I'm all about. I think things will pick up for me after Labor Day. So, I have some different things I think that will be coming out, interviews and conversations with people, and I'll have those up. I'll be doing all of the Twitter/X and Instagram
Right.
and putting things up on my website. But I'm hoping that people will use this time too to have time to read
Mhm.
before the fall begins. And I've just been really grateful about my first baby book journey so far. And I think it's, having the book out around 3 weeks, your hope is that just people will read the book, spread the word. And that's how, particularly, in the space that I'm talking with you, is that I know Black girls, brown girls, we read and we push stuff. And we're just like, we're on it. We're putting up our reviews, we're putting up our pictures, we're just, reading parts of the book. And so for me, my hope is that the energy of readers wanting to share the book or that it moved them. And that's what means the most to me, is that you come away from the book feeling moved, and that I get to, in some medium or platform, say thank you. And that's the biggest thing for me, is the gratitude I feel right now, to put this work out there and to be vulnerable, but also to claim power. This is a love letter to Black girls and Black women. It's a love letter. So I know my mama is proud of me. And,
Yes.
I just really am glad to be here this evening in conversation with you and really be able to just talk about all of the things we've spoken about and know that there's so much more and that readers will see those things too.
Yes, yes, yes. And your mama's proud, and my daddy is proud because he was the reader. I mean, my
Mhm.
mother's an educator. She was an educator, but my dad was the reader.
Mhm, mhm. Oh, yeah.
My mom usually watches these shows, so
Oh,
I'm sure she and I are going to talk about it here in a few minutes. But yes, my dad gave me my love of reading, and so I know that he's smiling down on me, saying, "Hey, yes, you're
yeah.
having these great conversations." And
Yes. No,
that's
I mean, this space is so necessary and it's so joyful. And I when I was asked about Brown Girl Collective, I was like, I'm there. I'm totally
yes,
there. And
well,
I'm
that
really
makes me feel
grateful.
good.
So,
Makes
it
me feel
takes
good.
energy and dedication and vision and imagination to see this space for us. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're so welcome. And over the weekend, I had an opportunity to go to the National Book Club conference here in Atlanta. And it's
Oh,
the same thing, yeah, we gotta, I'll give you some info if you don't know about it. So maybe you can be there next year. But
yeah.
it was Black book clubs from around the country, all and might have been about 1,500 people all together, just and maybe about 30 or so authors just coming and talking about their books and getting people interested and spreading the word. So it is just so important in whatever platforms that we have to do that, because the reality of it is our stories need to be told, number one.
Yes.
And I do know that sometimes, even if you got a mainline publisher or whatever, you
Mhm.
still got to get out there and push, because they're only going to do so much for you.
So true. I mean, I know, and we know as Black people, we have to do what we do. And so that's really crucial what you're saying. And it's good. And I mean, for me, the way, I mean, my art, whether I'm doing my visual art, my writing, or everything, my work centers on Black stories, Black narratives, Black women and Black girls. So getting out into the community, talking about the book, listening to what other people are doing in community, I mean, that's the work for me. And that's also the joy. And that's what feels fulfilling of, getting introduced to all kinds of work and book clubs and all kinds of things, and just being like, yes, and how can I support, so I think that's really important. And asking everybody, all your aunties, your friends, people you meet in the line, and say, I have this book, will you consider, and I like that vulnerability. And I published books of poetry, but publishing a novel is so different. It's like starting all over. And I'm really excited for wherever the journey of promise takes me. And in the meantime, as the book says, that boldness and determination to love your life and to promise yourself a bold and chosen and gorgeous and whole life is for me, one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves and also give others by loving ourselves.
Absolutely. I actually have a
Mhm.
couple other comments. It says, our stories need to be told by us. So thank you. Yes, that's true, because
Thank
sometimes
you.
we try to tell our stories and it's kind of difficult. I'm saving this one for last because this is a really good comment. This is an award-worthy body of work. I
Thank
hope
you.
you snag the noms and awards. Here's to continued success. Please swing by Houston. I'd love to give autographed copies for myself and as Christmas gifts. Yes, thank you, Phyllis.
Yes.
And
Thank
I
you.
would agree that it is an award-worthy body of work. I agree wholeheartedly, wholeheartedly. So I'm going to be on the lookout for that. And when it happens, I will email you and be like, see, I told you. This is what it is.
Well, I'll look forward to that email too, Marcy. And thank you so much, Phyllis, for that.
Yes, yes. So if you can hold on for just a second, Rachel, once again, I appreciate you being here. I don't want you to hang up yet. Just hold on
Okay.
for me for a second. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements. But thank you, Cleta, Phyllis, and everyone else is watching for your participation and for being here and in support of Rachel's great book. I'm going to show the cover again for those of you who may have missed it. But here we go. It's Promise. Please pick up a copy of Promise. I do have a question. Is it an audio yet, or is that
Yes,
for?
it is. You can
Okay.
listen to the audio.
So
Yes.
yes, there is an audio that's available as well if you prefer to do it that way and be able to, listen and hear the story told as an audio. So thank you. Hold on for 1 second. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me again for a wonderful conversation. I really did enjoy reading this book. I know Rachel can still hear me. I actually read it in a day. I love it that much. So I enjoyed reading that. I just continued until I was able to get through the story. But I want to share real quickly what's coming up next week. Next week we will have The Art of Scandal by Regina Black. So be on the lookout for that next Monday. The Art of Scandal by Regina Black. And then in 2 weeks, we will have Zelda Lockhart here to talk about her book, Trinity. So we are keeping this ball rolling. I know it's summertime and people are busy, but it's also a time where people are taking vacations and things like that and have an opportunity to really take time to dive in and read. So I definitely encourage you to pick up all of these books, add them to your shelf, even if you don't get to them a little later, or if you have a friend that you know might be interested in the story, please let them know about these wonderful authors. Also, last, because sometimes I forget to share this, but there is a Brown Girl Collective bookstore. So if you go to www.browngirlcollectivebookstore, you can find all of the titles for the different people that I talked to there. And it does go through the bookshop space. So if you purchase there, the proceeds will go towards helping me to bring on more artists and be able to support the work that's being done here. So all right, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let everyone go for this evening. And I look forward to seeing you again here real soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.